At 6:12 a.m., before the sun cleared the roofs, my phone lit up with a message that made my stomach drop. Your address doesn't exist. That was the moment. I knew something was very wrong. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA Karen, you already feel the dread crawling up your spine. Stay with me, because what started as a petty power move ended in flashing lights, handcuffs, and a felony charge no one saw coming. I live on a quiet street where the loudest drama is usually a barking dog or a trash can left out too long. Our HOA president, a woman everyone whispered about but no one challenged, ruled the neighborhood with laminated notices and a smile that never reached her eyes. She had warned me before about my mailbox color, my porch light, even the font on my house numbers. I ignored her. That was mistake number one. The morning after her last warning, delivery drivers began circling my block like confused vultures. A grocery order vanished. A courier called to say emergency services flagged my address as invalid. When I stepped outside, my heart slammed against my ribs. My house numbers were gone. In their place were numbers that belonged to a vacant home 2 streets over. Clean screws, fresh alignment. This wasn't vandalism. It was deliberate. I checked my security footage. At 2:47 a.m., a familiar sedan rolled up. Headlights off. A figure stepped out wearing gloves and a reflective HOA vest, moving with the confidence of someone who thought they were untouchable. She unscrewed my numbers, swapped them with another set, and drove away. It took less than 4 minutes. I called the HOA office. Voicemail. I called the president directly. She answered, cheerful, and told me addresses were community property standards and that confusion builds character. She laughed. That was mistake number 2. By noon, a police officer knocked, not to help, but to ask why my address didn't match city records. I showed him the footage. His expression changed. He explained that altering house numbers can obstruct emergency services, misdirect law enforcement, and trigger serious charges. I realized then that her little game had crossed a line she didn't even know existed. By the afternoon, the situation had snowballed, far beyond missing packages and confused delivery drivers. 2 police cruisers parked at the end of my driveway, while an officer carefully photographed my front door, the mailbox, and the mismatched numbers bolted into the siding. The calm street suddenly felt exposed, like everyone was watching a private nightmare unfold in public. I kept replaying the footage in my head, still shocked someone would risk so much over control. The officer explained things plainly. House numbers are not decorative. They're part of an address registered with the city, emergency services, utilities, and postal systems. Changing them without authorization can delay ambulances, misroute fire trucks, and interfere with official records. In many states, that crosses into criminal territory. I asked him if this really counted as a felony. He nodded and said, when intent is proven, absolutely. Intent, that word mattered. And thanks to the cameras, intent was crystal clear. Later that day, I drove to City Hall to request official documentation showing my registered address history. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I explained why. She printed a timeline showing my address unchanged for over a decade. She also noted something interesting. A temporary address discrepancy had already been flagged in the system early that morning. Someone had called it in. The caller identified herself as the HOA president. That was mistake number 3. When I returned home, the HOA president was waiting across the street, arms crossed, sunglasses on, acting like she owned the asphalt beneath her feet. She told me I was being dramatic. She said numbers could be swapped for uniformity. She even threatened fines for unauthorized reinstallation if I touched them. I calmly informed her the police were already involved. Her smile cracked for half a second. That evening, I reinstalled my correct numbers with temporary adhesive, exactly as the officer instructed, and documented everything. Around 9 p.m., an ambulance screamed past my street, heading somewhere else, but the sound made my chest tighten. What if that had been for me? Or a neighbor? The weight of what she'd done finally settled in. The next morning, detectives returned. They asked for my footage, my call logs, the HOA messages. I handed over everything. One detective paused on a frame showing her face illuminated by my porch light. She knew what she was doing, he said quietly. By noon, word spread through the neighborhood. People whispered. Curtains moved. A neighbor knocked to say she'd had packages misdelivered for months and thought it was her fault. Another admitted the HOA president had once threatened to adjust his address too. A pattern was forming. I didn't feel victorious. I felt stunned. This had grown bigger than me, and it wasn't slowing down. The arrest didn't happen the way movies make you expect. There were no dramatic shouts or drawn weapons. It was quiet, procedural, and somehow more unsettling because of that. I was standing in my kitchen when I saw a familiar sedan pull up outside her house, followed by an unmarked vehicle. Two detectives stepped out, calm and purposeful, like this was just another stop on a long list. For her, it was the moment everything collapsed. They knocked once. She opened the door, still wearing confidence like armor. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. Her posture shifted almost immediately. Arms uncrossed, head tilted, a defensive smile that failed. One detective held up printed stills from my security footage. Another read from a tablet. When they mentioned obstruction of emergency services and intentional alteration of a registered address, her face went pale. She tried to argue. I could see the gestures through my window, pointing toward my house, waving her hands like authority itself should protect her. Then came the sentence that ended it. "Ma'am, please turn around." The click of handcuffs was faint, but it echoed in my head. Neighbors emerged slowly, pretending to check mail or water plants. No one said a word. The woman who once ruled HOA meetings with threats and fines was guided into the back seat of a police car. As it drove away, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, relief. Later that day, detectives returned to explain what would happen next. The charge wasn't just about my house numbers. It included falsifying information to a municipal system, misuse of HOA authority, and knowingly creating a risk to public safety. Because she had called in the address change herself, intent was documented. That elevated it to a felony. The HOA board scrambled. Emails poured in, distancing statements, emergency meetings scheduled. They suspended her position, pending investigation, which felt almost laughable given the circumstances. A board member knocked on my door to apologize, eyes downcast, voice shaking. He admitted they'd let her run unchecked for years because no one wanted conflict. Within days, inspectors came through the neighborhood verifying addresses. Several homes had discrepancies, small ones, enough to prove this wasn't a one-time lapse. It was a pattern of control disguised as order. I fixed my numbers permanently with city-approved hardware. The police signed off. Life should have gone back to normal, but something had changed. Neighbors started talking, really talking, about fines that never made sense, warnings that felt personal, threats delivered with smiles. One quiet, illegal act had cracked open years of silence, and it all started with 4 screws in the dark. The weeks after the arrest felt like living in the aftermath of a storm. Everything looked the same on the surface, but nothing felt stable underneath. HOA meetings that were once sparsely attended suddenly overflowed. Folding chairs lined the walls. People who had never spoken up before now came armed with folders, screenshots and dates written in red ink. Fear had turned into momentum. An interim president was appointed, a quiet man who kept adjusting his glasses and clearing his throat. He opened the first meeting with a reminder about community harmony, but the room wasn't interested in platitudes anymore. One neighbor stood and described how her address had been corrected years earlier, causing a fire inspection notice to go to the wrong house. Another admitted police once showed up looking for a suspect who supposedly lived at his address. Until now, no one had connected the dots. The board's attorney attended via video call, his tone carefully neutral. He confirmed what the detectives had already said. Altering or misreporting addresses could expose the HOA to serious liability. The room went silent. People realized this wasn't just about one woman overstepping. It was about a system that enabled her. Meanwhile, I was contacted by the district attorney's office. They wanted a formal statement, not just about the footage, but about prior interactions. I described the warnings, the threats disguised as rules, the phone call where she laughed. The prosecutor nodded and said something that stuck with me. These cases only work when someone finally says enough. Outside the legal process, something unexpected happened. Neighbors started fixing things together. House numbers were replaced, mailboxes repainted, porch lights installed. It wasn't mandated. It was cooperative. For the first time, the street felt like a community instead of a checklist. Then came the court date announcement. She had been released on bail but barred from exercising any HOA authority. When her name appeared on the docket, labeled with felony, obstruction, it sent a chill. Through the neighborhood group chat, the woman who once fined people for weeds was now facing consequences that couldn't be waived. The night before the hearing, I stood on my porch looking at my correctly mounted numbers. Simple, clear, boring, exactly how they should be. I thought about how close this came to being brushed off as a nuisance dispute, how easily I could have ignored it, fixed the numbers quietly and moved on. Instead, everything had changed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because accountability finally showed up where fear used to live. And the story wasn't over yet. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, almost ordinary, which made the stakes feel heavier. No grand speeches, no dramatic music, just wood benches, fluorescent lights, and a judge who had clearly seen every excuse imaginable. When she walked in, escorted by her attorney, The confidence was gone. She looked smaller, quieter, like authority had drained out of her overnight. The prosecutor laid it out methodically. Security footage timestamps, call logs to the municipal office, HOA emails showing her unilateral decisions. A city official testified that address. Integrity is critical for emergency response, and that intentional alteration creates measurable risk. The word felony hung in the air, no longer theoretical, no longer dramatic, just factual. Her attorney argued it was an overreach, a misunderstanding, an HOA dispute blown out of proportion. The judge stopped him mid-sentence and asked one question. Did your client knowingly report a false address change to the city? There was a pause. Too long. The answer came quietly, yes. That was it. The plea agreement came next. No jail time, but probation. Community service, mandatory ethics training, and a permanent record. She was barred from serving on any HOA board in the state. Fines were issued, not just criminally, but civilly. The HOA itself faced oversight for failing to prevent abuse of authority. Consequences spread outward, exactly as they should. When it was over, I stepped outside into the sunlight feeling lighter than I had in months. Not triumphant, just free. Neighbors texted asking how it went. I told them the truth. Accountability isn't loud, but it's real. Life slowly returned to normal. Deliveries arrived. Emergency services verified access points. The HOA rewrote its bylaws with transparency requirements and checks on power. Meetings became shorter, calmer, boring, in the best way possible. Sometimes I still look at my house numbers before going inside. They haven't changed since. 4 digits, evenly spaced, firmly mounted. A reminder that small things matter when they connect to larger systems. A reminder that authority without oversight is dangerous. And a reminder that standing up, even over something that seems petty, can stop far bigger harm. People ask if I regret pushing it so far. I don't. Because the real cost would have been silence. Silence lets control grow. Silence turns neighbors into targets. Silence nearly turned a power trip into a tragedy. This story didn't end with revenge. It ended with clarity, with rules applied evenly, with a neighborhood that finally understood its own power, and with one simple truth burned into all of us. Messing with addresses isn't just petty, it's serious, and sometimes it's criminal.